Hello, viewers. Israel is a terrorist state that is committing genocide of the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people. One way that they are facilitating this process is by using high-tech advanced weaponry to slaughter tens of thousands of people. On October 18th, they attempted to do this to a 13-year-old boy in northern Gaza, but they failed when their strike only maimed him, so when a crowd gathered around to help, they sent another.
ومصابين كمان هداك استشهد المرمي على الأرض.
You know, watching this happen, I can't help but think of the Gaza beach bombing, where the IDF struck a group of children, and then as they fled running along the beach, the IDF struck again, killing 4 of them. They claimed that they were targeting Hamas terrorists, provided no evidence for this, and this was in 2014, so 10 years ago. Nothing has changed. The footage of this war crime was witnessed by millions of people online. Despite this, major media barely covered it at all. Today, we're going to look at what little coverage it actually did receive, first in an article from the Washington Post, and then in an article from the Times of Israel. This is another case where I want to pay attention to the language and the framing being used in these articles and to look at any potential contrast between these two outlets. The Washington Post article is titled, "Video Shows Israeli Strike on Crowd of People Trying to Help Wounded Boy." Seconds after people rushed to help a 13-year-old boy grievously wounded from a strike in northern Gaza, another strike hit a few feet away. On Friday, 21-year-old northern Gaza journalist Wafa Taher was staying in the home of her family's landlord, her own having been destroyed, when an explosion from an airstrike ripped through the air. Looking out the window, she began to film. Her video shows a small, scorched crater in Al Nafaq Street about 300 feet away, and next to it, a boy waving his arms in distress, his cries for help audible even at a distance. "He's a child," Taher's shaken voice narrates. "In pieces. Why did they strike him?" Taher's Instagram video, filmed on the edge of the Jabalia refugee camp, circulated rapidly on social media over the weekend. In her video, a dozen men round the corner behind the boy. Seeing what has happened to his body, they grab their heads, throw up their arms, and yell for help. The boy collapses backward. A man in a white t-shirt bends over him, gesturing for help, then kneels next to him with another man. Then, 48 seconds after Taher had started filming, a brief whizzing noise announces a second airstrike. A yellow-orange explosion erupts from the ground several feet from the men who had arrived to help. In the moment of the blast, the 2 men can be seen trying to lift the boy's body as others begin to run away. Taher screams and yells for her father to get back from the window. The boy, 13-year-old Mohammed Salem, had simply been walking on the street before the strike, Taher said. He died of his wounds, said Palestinian Red Crescent spokesperson Nabal Farsak. A 14-year-old boy, whose feet were severed by the second strike, was pronounced dead after being taken away by Red Crescent ambulances, and over 20 others were wounded. There's a high probability that the weapons used here to execute these 2 injured, unarmed children and mutilate a crowd of people for simply trying to help them were supplied to the Israeli military by the United States. To my American viewers, we're all a part of this. We paid for that. In response to questions about the strike, the Israeli military told the Post that it is working to dismantle the military and administrative capabilities of Hamas, and that it takes possible precautions to reduce harm to civilians. The military did not say why it launched the strike or what was being targeted. The reason this shit can fly, the reason they can so blatantly lie about this, is because they know the West doesn't care. It's on video. It's a 13-year-old boy. And still, they blame Hamas and say they protect civilians. And the fact that there's only 2 major outlets that are covering such a truly clear as day, horrific abuse of power and example of genocidal action from the IDF, it doesn't matter how horrific of an atrocity Israel commits, as long as our government still supports them, then our media will follow suit. In the aftermath videos, as ambulances approach with sirens wailing, wounded people move in their direction. A man runs past the site of the strike carrying a child in his arms. A woman follows him walking briskly with her arm around another child who leans against her. Farsak said Red Crescent ambulances were already close to the scene, transporting people to the hospital when responders witnessed both strikes. The scene of the apparent double-tap strike was not far from the site of recent Israeli operations that have destroyed large swaths of the Jabalia refugee camp. On October 6th, the Israeli military sent elements of 2 brigades of the 162nd Division into Jabalia in what it claimed was an effort to root out Hamas efforts to rebuild there. Since then, Israeli troops have encircled much of the camp, cut it off from humanitarian assistance, and demolished large stretches of the area, driving residents out and sending military vehicles deep into the camp, satellite imagery shows. Civilians attempting to flee have been shot at, and the Israeli military has ordered the 3 main hospitals servicing that part of northern Gaza to shut down and has fired on them directly, according to local health authorities. Residents fear that the new incursion is part of a general's plan proposed by a former Israeli general and pushed by some members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and then larger parts of the Strip by systematically forcing out civilians and starving out or shooting down anyone who remains. If you're not familiar with the general's plan, I'll go into that. The plan, as reported in the Times of Israel, we have to tell the residents of North Gaza that they have 1 week to evacuate the territory, which then becomes a military zone. A zone in which every figure is a target and, most importantly, no supplies enter this territory. A siege is not only an effective military tactic, it is also compliant with international law. In case you were wondering, no, starving out civilians and threatening displacement at gunpoint and shooting them if they don't leave, those things are not legal under international law. That's not a siege. At least 73 people were killed Saturday in northern Gaza, the Civil Defense Force said, after an Israeli airstrike hit a group of homes in the Beit Lahia neighborhood north of Jabalia. The Israeli military said the strike was against a Hamas terror target. So here we have no follow-up on the specifics of this, just lists the number of bodies, which is 73, and then quotes the Israeli military saying that it was Hamas, and it makes no mention of the fact that the entire block was leveled to the ground, that number 73 doesn't account for all those still missing under the rubble. And the story is linked, but unless you click that link, all you're left with is 73. A statistic, a figure, rather than what it really is, which is human beings. Human beings like Mahasen Khatib, a 31-year-old illustrator whose work celebrated Palestinian culture. "I don't want to just be another number on the news ticker," she said in a post to her social media feed this summer. "I am a story." The cruel irony here is that her death and her life in this story are reduced down to a number. Thaher said her family had fled their destroyed part of Jabalia about 2 weeks ago, without even enough clothes. "We fled without anything because they came right after they dropped leaflets, so we got scared and fled right away. Now I'm in a house that is not my house and in an area that is not my neighborhood with no meaning to me." She said she had planned to stay in her neighborhood to produce a video about the war, and they ruined everything that I had planned. But I will prepare again. Wafa's profile will be linked in the description. Please go support her. People like this are heroic beyond words, and we need to share their stories. One of the arguments you see frequently made to justify this genocide is that the IDF is moral actually because they warn people before destroying their homes, which time and time again we've seen is not true. When they actually do warn people with flyers, this is what it is. They're not being saved, they're being evicted. They're having their lives uprooted and destroying the place that the roots were. So anyways, that was the first article about the strike. And now I want to turn to how the Times of Israel covered this. See if we can notice any differences in framing, language, sources, or potential omission. The title is "Footage Shows Strike Hitting Group of Gazans Trying to Help Stranded Wounded Boy." Yeah, right away. It's just a strike now. It's not an Israeli strike. It's just something struck them. Even though the article itself quotes the Israeli military as saying, yeah, that was us. Their decision to omit the name of the perpetrator, I think it speaks to a need for continuous reinforcements, however subtle, of the cognitive dissonance, while writing to an audience of Israelis whose country and military are committing this genocide from the reality that they are living their lives while being directly complicit. Footage taken last Friday by a Gaza journalist shows a wounded boy lying in the street waving his hands in distress after an apparent strike caused a small scorched crater nearby on the edge of the Jabalia refugee camp. Apparent strike. What the fuck does that mean? They won't say who did it because they know they're complicit. He's a child, journalist Wafa Thaher heard saying. There's a typo. That's how little they care about Palestinian voices. They just don't even proofread it when they quote them. He's a child, journalist Wafa Thaher can be heard saying, in pieces. Why did they strike him? As the child, 13-year-old Mohammed Salem, pleads for assistance, roughly a dozen men begin approaching him before grabbing their heads in disbelief, throwing their hands up and yelling for help. Two of the men try lifting the boy up when a second strike targets the area, sending all of them flying back. Again, it's just a strike. There's no actors in this story. It may as well have been a alien. Salem went on to die from his wounds, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent, which said that a 14-year-old boy whose feet were severed by the second strike was also pronounced dead after being taken away by an ambulance. Asked to comment on the incident, the IDF told the Post that it is working to dismantle the military and administrative capabilities of Hamas, and that it takes possible precautions to reduce harm to civilians. The Israeli army did not say why it launched the strikes or what was being targeted. Alright, pay attention now to where they take this. Earlier this month, the IDF ordered the evacuation of Jabalia and surrounding towns in northern Gaza, where several 100,000 Palestinians are believed to still reside. So this paragraph coming immediately after, showing footage of them executing a child and uncritically presenting their justifications for doing that, to me it reads as, they told you so, they warned you to get out of there, you were supposed to evacuate, we told you to leave, and hundreds of thousands of you are still there. The underlying implication there being, you know, what do you expect to happen? And then they don't even bother quoting the IDF about what they're trying to do with Hamas. They just state it outright. The IDF has been operating to prevent Hamas from regrouping in northern Gaza. The IDF is going for Hamas. That's what they're doing. They just got done telling us that they killed 2 children in intentionally targeted strikes while one was lying on the ground, injured and unarmed. To anyone that isn't inundated with IDF propaganda, the contrast here between what they say and then what they show is just unbelievable. While tens of thousands have fled, many more have remained, either because they are unwilling or unable to evacuate. Some have claimed that the IDF has been targeting those trying to flee, a charge the army denies. There have also been reports that Hamas has been preventing civilians from evacuating North Gaza. So they provide no source for this claim, these alleged reports that Hamas has been preventing people from evacuating, but it turns out that this claim can be sourced back to, you guessed it, the IDF. In audio published by the Israel Defense Forces Thursday, an IDF officer can be heard calling on a man to head towards Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The man replies that Hamas is placing roadblocks with cars and just sending people back home. The Gazan also says that Hamas members are shooting at Palestinians attempting to leave the area. They provide no evidence for these claims. And we've seen this sort of thing before, like this exact sort of thing. A year ago in October, when the Gaza Baptist Hospital was bombed, killing hundreds of people, the IDF released an audio recording, allegedly of a phone call between 2 Hamas operatives, where they blame another Palestinian resistance group for the bombing, conveniently absolving the IDF of any wrongdoing. This recording was proven to be fake by a number of Arabic linguistic experts and journalistic sources. There's no evidence that Hamas is attacking Palestinians that are attempting to leave, but there's a plethora of evidence showing the opposite.
Benjamin Netanyahu told US Secretary of State Antony Blinken yesterday that Israel is not pursuing a strategy of isolating the north of Gaza, is not telling people that if they don't leave, they're effectively targets, and is not starving people out of these areas, the so-called general's plan. Watching these images today, hard not to conclude that he is just telling the Americans what they want to hear.
As is so often remarked when talking about the actions of Israel and its military, every accusation is a confession. Also, the very next line here, the recording was made by a soldier in the Military Intelligence Directorate's Unit 504, which has been calling up Palestinians in northern Gaza in recent days, instructing them to leave the area for their safety. The IDF is forcing these people out at gunpoint and by threatening to kill them and by killing them, and they expect you to believe that they're also making personal phone calls to individual Palestinians, and that the one recorded instance of this blames Hamas for all of the things that they are doing? Like, I know this is the Times of Israel. I know they're obviously going to be manufacturing consent, but they're not even trying to hide the fact anymore that they believe all of their readers to be brainwashed idiots. The United States has expressed concern that Israel is implementing the so-called general's plan aimed at laying siege to northern Gaza. The IDF has denied that this is the case and began allowing some aid into the area after 2 weeks of blocking assistance at the beginning of the month. You know, the IDF might have denied it, but the Prime Minister didn't, and now they're taking the actions that it describes. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a meeting yesterday to publicly clarify that Israel is not implementing the general's plan, but the premier balked at the idea, according to a U.S. official familiar with the matter. The U.S. can stop this anytime they want. They just are choosing not to. Israel cannot continue this genocide without military support from the United States. Anytime you see headlines of the U.S. administration expressing concern or warning Netanyahu or drawing a red line, just know that they are lying. It's a smokescreen for them to continue doing what they want to do, which is killing everyone and destroying everything in Gaza. That is what they want. That is what their actions show that they want. And until those actions change, don't believe a word that they say. So anyways, that's all I had to say today. It seems like a lot of you guys liked the article read, so I'll probably continue this as a series. If the people around you aren't seeing what's going on here, sharing this video might help in some small way. As always, I'll leave some fundraisers linked below. We can't stay silent about this. We have to keep pushing. We have to keep sharing these people's stories and getting the truth out about what's actually going on, because so much of it is being obfuscated, and it's being obfuscated to defend a Holocaust. All right, see you guys.